a very nice LFO. Okay, so LFO. You press the LFO button. Now these 4 knobs represent the wave shape, of which there are 7. The rate, which goes anywhere from a variety of rates up to quantizing with your sequencer. Pitch, which allows you to direct how much the LFO affects the pitch. And filter, which allows you to direct how much the LFO affects the filter. So let's start out by applying the LFO to the pitch so that we can hear what the other functions are doing. So we'll go at a decent rate. Okay, first let's talk about wave. So I'm going to take this all the way to the left, which is a sine wave. That's our sine wave. Next is a triangle wave. Next is what I call a ramp wave, but they call a sawtooth up wave. After that, we have sawtooth down, or what I would call a sawtooth. Next, we have square. Random. Which is just a bunch of random voltages that are interpolated. And controlling the rate makes those changes happen more rapidly. All right, and our last wave is sample and hold. Of course, your amount directed to pitch, you can control the amount, which controls the extent to which the modulation is applied to the pitch. Since we're using sample and hold, if we have a low amount, there isn't going to be a lot of variation, but if we turn it all the way up, we can hear a whole bunch of different pitches. And of course, all of these waves can also be directed to the filter. Let's set the filter to something mildly interesting. And then we'll listen to what the LFO can do to the filter. We'll turn the pitch back to 0. Okay, that's a pretty straightforward sine wave. Triangle. Sawtooth up. Sawtooth down. Square. Random, which is my favorite. That's a really cool functionality. So by having this, you can introduce some interesting variations to the filter and make them subtle so they're not like overt, which I guess is the definition of subtle. Okay, so let's have a listen here. Okay, we'll get this going really fast. Okay, and then we'll diminish the amount. And that introduces enough variation in the sound so that the sound is really interesting and isn't static. It gives it a certain depth and breadth. And if we add a little bit of drive in there, you have a really nice sound. That's a really useful waveform to have in your LFO, and it's cool that this relatively basic synthesizer has such a high level modulation type that can be really functionally beneficial. Okay, and of course, you could also, I'd like to hear that applied to pitch, because introducing variation in pitch is one of the hallmarks, the secret hallmarks of analog sound. Let's go up here and turn a little bit. Okay. Obviously, that's a little too much. That could be really, really useful in generating a really analogish sound. Just those variations, those slight variations, that's what vintage analog really often did on its own. So that's really a cool thing. So in addition to the adding drive, you can really generate some truly analog sounds. But anyway, that's a lot of nice wave shapes to have, including sample and hold and that random one, and then the traditional ones. More wave shapes than a lot of synthesizers have provided. Some vintage synthesizers that shall remain nameless only had, sawtooth and square. So you've got a full featured LFO here, and it makes some really, really nice sounds. Oh, and one final thing we haven't talked about is rate. Let's get something that has a rate. So if you are using your sequencer and you want your LFO to sync with your sequencer, which is a pretty reasonable thing to want. Let's turn off the pitch. So if you've got sample and hold going, and you have your sequence running, you can go to your LFO rate, and once you get past 127, you get into synchronizing with your sequencer. 1 to 1 is a whole note. 1 to 2 is obviously a half note. You have a dotted quarter, a quarter note, dotted eighth, fourth triplet, quarter note triplet, eighth note, dotted 16th, eighth note triplet, 16th note, 16th note triplet, and that's the highest one. So you can sync your LFO with your sequencer, which means that your sequences are going to be that much cooler because you can have LFO effects that are synced. So that's a really cool feature. Again, inexpensive, small synth with some pretty high-end features.